When Charlie made a family card for his family, I asked, "Why did you make this card?" He responded with a chuckle, "They're my family, so of course they deserve one. Do you have an issue with that?" He followed up by saying, "If you knew the importance of those who support you when you're alone, you wouldn't question it." Were you surprised by my assertive tone? I was indeed taken aback. Charlie, always direct, further explained, "If you truly appreciate them, you'd contribute more to my family. Then you'd belong. Until then, consider it a probation period." I was unfamiliar with the concept of trial in family dynamics. Charlie elaborated, "It means you're not completely accepted into the family yet. If this bothers you, you're free to leave. For now, it's just the 5 of us." This revelation stunned me, prompting me to immediately cancel our joint credit cards and move out. My name is Martha. I'm 32 years old, and I illustrate professionally from my home studio. Previously, I worked for a major advertising firm but chose the freelance path about 4 years ago after getting married. I grew up with my grandparents after losing my parents in an accident. For college, I returned to my parents' old neighborhood in the city center where I've lived ever since. I met Charlie, my future husband, at a charming Italian restaurant where he worked. The place was known for its great food at reasonable prices, making it a favorite among me and my colleagues. Charlie, with his charismatic presence, quickly caught my attention. He had a unique, captivating aura. Even the manager humorously noted that people frequented just to see him. It was hard not to become a fan. Our connection deepened swiftly, and soon everyone regarded us as a couple. Before I knew it, we were married. I don't recall much from that time, it felt like a blur. Despite this, my feelings for Charlie were genuine, and I was thrilled about our union. Leaving my corporate job amicably, I embraced freelancing, which Charlie supported as he continued his restaurant work. Opting for a simple life, we skipped a lavish wedding and just signed the marriage papers. Our families met briefly, which was sufficient for us. With Charlie at work and me managing household duties alongside my freelance projects, our routines were erratic. Yet, we ensured to share meals when possible. It was a modest but content life. A year into our marriage, Charlie mentioned his family plan to visit. Excited, I eagerly anticipated bonding with them, especially given my admiration for Charlie's large family and my early loss of my parents. When Charlie's family arrived at our home, 5 of them in total, I was taken aback by their forwardness. His elder sister, who is 36 and works at a local store, was particularly bold. "Hey, which room's mine?" she demanded as soon as she entered, a stark contrast to the polite demeanor I remembered from our previous meetings. Alongside her was Charlie's younger sister, 20, who remained as reserved as she had been during our first encounter, hardly uttering a word. Following the elder sister's brisk lead, I showed them to the guest room and Charlie's parents to my parents' old room, which had a Japanese style I thought they might appreciate. Once settled, his sister made a bold declaration. "Well, since we're all under the same roof now, you'd better start treating our family right," she said, her words puzzling me. When I looked to Charlie for an explanation, he chuckled mysteriously. It was then he revealed they had given up their previous home and moved in here permanently without prior discussion. "Sorry, our family home had to be vacated suddenly, and they had nowhere else to go," he explained. I wished he had informed me sooner. I had assumed their stay was only temporary. From the moment they moved in, Charlie's family showed no restraint. All 4 of them expected me to manage everything while they did nothing but issue commands and complaints. They made no effort to find jobs or a place of their own. When I inquired about their employment status, I received yet another shock. "Oh, I quit that awful job at the supermarket," his sister confessed. Although she was employed before, it had only been part-time, a fact I had misunderstood given her age. She admitted she hadn't held a steady job since high school. Charlie's parents also had part-time jobs they abandoned before moving in. His other sister, claiming to be a student, was unemployed. "Why should I work when I'm part of a well-off family now?" she reasoned arrogantly. When I pressed her on whom she meant by a well-off family, I got a startling response. "You, obviously. You received a hefty settlement and insurance payout after your parents' accident, and you don't even have a mortgage on this place. You can live comfortably without having to work," she remarked with a laugh. I expressed my concerns to Charlie upon his return, but he reacted angrily, a side of him I had never seen before. Everyone's exhausted from being suddenly uprooted. Give them some time to recuperate. Or do you want to kick out my family, Martha? He challenged. I was stunned into silence. Then his tone softened. I'm sorry for yelling. It's been a tough day for me too. Can you please try to be a bit more understanding? Looking back, Charlie was skilled at manipulating situations with a mix of kindness and severity, but in that moment I failed to see it. I agreed to endure a bit longer. The situation with Charlie's family soon became more oppressive. They treated me like a servant and demanded money for outings under the guise of needing cash for job hunting, a claim I suspected was untrue. Pointing this out would only lead to hours of blame being laid on me by the entire family. Sharing my concerns with Charlie didn't resolve anything. Everyone's feeling frustrated about not finding jobs. Just bear with it a little longer. I'll talk with them, he would say, trying to smooth things over. As time went by, I gradually lost hope that speaking up would change anything. Nonetheless, the incessant requests for money from Charlie's family slowly tapered off. I suspect Charlie might have finally talked to them because the issue seemed to subside on its own. Yet, the money I had provided earlier was predictably never returned. 3 months into this ordeal, I stumbled upon a distressing discovery. Our credit card bill was unusually high, and I worried about potential fraud. I checked the statement immediately and found that all the charges were made on family credit cards. These expenses spanned a variety of items: food, drinks, books, games, and even luxury brand items. To my dismay, the statement showed that 5 different family credit cards were in use, all under my name. Charlie had been the one managing these cards. He had persuaded me by saying it would be simpler for me to handle them and asked, "Can I just leave this to you?" Unbeknownst to me, extra cards had been issued without my consent. It became clear why Charlie had ceased asking for cash. They had switched to using credit cards for their purchases and cash withdrawals. When I confronted Charlie about why he had issued family cards for his in-laws without my approval, he nonchalantly replied, "Well, you complain when they say they're broke, so what else could I do? Plus, you know who supported you when you were alone, right? Can you speak like that to the important family of your benefactor?" His bold and dismissive tone shocked me. It wasn't like anything I'd heard from him before. He added, "If you're thankful, you should do more for my family. Then I'll accept you as part of the family too. Until then, think of it like you're still on a trial period." I had never heard of a trial period in marriage before. Seeing my stunned silence, Charlie pressed on, "This means you're not officially part of the family yet. If you're not okay with that, you're free to leave any time. Right now, it's just the 5 of us in our family unless freeloaders leave," he concluded. That moment crystallized Charlie's true nature for me, leaving me feeling as if all color had drained from my face. I began to contemplate divorcing Charlie and started to question why I had married him in the first place. Initially, I was drawn to him simply because he was physically attractive, like many other women. At first, I was just infatuated with his looks without any substantial reason. Then, during one of my visits to the restaurant, Charlie approached me as I was heading to the restroom and remarked, "You seem different, Martha, kind of mysterious." "Sorry, I shouldn't say that to a customer." I was taken aback but intrigued, and I began to pay more attention to him from then on. Maybe that was his strategy to make me like him. Looking back calmly, it all adds up. I remember once a colleague jokingly said I was a wealthy lady living alone in a condo, and soon after that, Charlie started showing more interest in me, possibly because he was intrigued by my wealth and living situation. Honestly, Charlie wasn't exactly my type, to put it nicely. He was more modern. If I'm being blunt, he seemed a bit superficial. I preferred mature men who spoke softly and seriously. Yet, somehow, I ended up falling for Charlie, a typical handsome guy who could easily charm a woman, especially someone like me who was new to the working world and not accustomed to such attention. Reflecting on all this now left me feeling frustrated and ashamed. I felt an urge to lash out and break things around the house, a stark contrast to the controlled life I had strived to maintain. Resisting the urge, I instead decided to carefully plan my next moves to get even. I knew I had to play the long game, managing the situation with as much cunning as Charlie had employed in manipulating me. The condo we lived in, purchased on a mortgage by my father just after my birth, wasn't expensive back then. However, due to rapid development in the area and a new shopping center nearby, it had become a sought-after luxury residence. My parents, hoping to expand our family, had chosen a large condo which now provided ample space even with Charlie's family invading our home. Their presence was a constant irritation, especially since I worked from home, but I bore it all for the sake of my plan for revenge. When I was 4, both my parents tragically died in a car accident while returning from my paternal grandfather's funeral. They collided with a speeding car on the freeway. That day, I was supposed to be with them but stayed home due to a high fever from the flu, making me the sole survivor of our immediate family. The mortgage was covered by the group credit life insurance they had, which meant I only had to handle the management fees and property taxes for the condo. Charlie suggested he could contribute just a bit more than the cost of those fees since there was no mortgage. If I pitch in that much, we should be able to manage with Martha's income, right? We'll each use our earnings for personal expenses. Sounds fair, doesn't it? He had proposed. I agreed, thinking it might ease some of my financial burden. At that time, I was still somewhat blinded by my feelings for Charlie and went along with his suggestion. It seemed Charlie perceived himself as the head of the household, somewhat providing for me, while in reality I was the one covering most of our living expenses, including utilities, groceries, and any social outings. Now, with 5 extra dependents in the house, managing my income alone was becoming unsustainable. Yet, I feigned ignorance and bore the increasing strain, biding my time and watching as Charlie's family indulged in shopping sprees at my expense, reminding myself that I would have the last laugh. 6 months into plotting my departure, I reached my breaking point and decided it was time to act. Exhausted and resolved, I confronted Charlie. I'm at my limit. It's time to make a choice. It's either me or your family, I told him, presenting him with an ultimatum. He was visibly taken aback, but I continued undeterred. None of your family members lift a finger to help around the house. They just dump all their chores on me. You know I work from home. I'm not just idly passing the time, yet they treat me like a freeloader and belittle me, claiming you're the one supporting me. I've had enough. I cried out as I faced him. Charlie responded with just a smirk. Then you should leave. Didn't I warn you before? You're not truly part of this family yet. Giving up now means you haven't earned your place in it. He retorted. Shocked by his coldness, I stared at him in disbelief. What's surprising? If you can't tolerate my family, then it's you who must leave, he concluded. This stark revelation made me see the depth of his manipulation and solidified my decision. It was time to reclaim my life and my home. As I realized the extent of Charlie's scheme, a chilling clarity settled over me. He had plotted this entire scenario, hoping his family's overwhelming presence would drive me out, making it easier for him to claim the apartment and possibly part of my savings as alimony. This revelation, despite my suspicions, was still a shock. I had once loved and married Charlie, but this realization catalyzed my decision to leave him for good. Resolute, I declared, I've decided to divorce you, Charlie. But let's be clear, this condo is mine and I am not at fault here. You brought your family into our home without my consent and allowed them to disrespect me. Charlie looked genuinely surprised by my firm stance, unaccustomed as he was to me defying him. Until now, I had mostly acquiesced to his demands, but recalling those moments only fueled my anger. I can't tolerate another moment with you and your family, so I'm leaving now. But be ready to leave as well, I told him assertively. Flustered, Charlie retorted, This is ridiculous. This is our home. We're not going anywhere. Ever heard of tenant rights? You can't just evict us from our own home. Ignoring his protests, I left the apartment and sought refuge at my grandparents' house. I shared everything with them and asked for shelter until the situation was resolved. They were appalled by what I had endured and scolded me for not coming to them sooner. With tears and concern, they embraced me. I'm sorry, Grandma and Grandpa. I know I worried you, but I'll be all right now, I reassured them, forcing a smile through my tears. The day after I left, Charlie contacted me, perplexed. What's all this about? What mail are you talking about? he asked, referring to the certified letter from my lawyer. I was impressed by the swift action of my legal team. I'm not paying any alimony and I'm not leaving the condo, Charlie insisted, oblivious to his lack of legal standing. The condo was jointly owned since we were married. If that's your stance, then compensate me for half its value to buy out my share, he demanded, making an absurd claim. Please communicate through my lawyer from now on, I stated firmly, ending the call. I expected he might try to reach me again, but I had no desire to continue the conversation. True to my expectations, Charlie called again the next morning, repeating his previous questions with no new tact. What mail are you referring to? The cards aren't working. What did you do? He pressed. What I did was cancel it. That card belonged to me, and you were merely an authorized user, I explained. Before leaving, I had transferred all the accounts linked to that card to another one and terminated the original. Naturally, the family cards would cease to function once mine was cancelled. You covered the management fees and property taxes for the first 5 months only. It's not substantial, but I can deduct that from the alimony if you prefer. I mocked him, turning his logic against him. This confrontation marked the beginning of a new chapter for me, one where I would no longer be manipulated or burdened by Charlie and his scheming family. I was determined to reclaim my life and my home. The muted shouting coming from Charlie over the phone was no surprise. He had managed to pay the agreed amount only for the first 5 months, after which he started making various excuses related to work and other personal issues, always finding reasons to delay the payments before stopping them altogether. If he had forgotten about these commitments and assumed they were still being handled, it was quite an oversight. But frankly, his lapses no longer mattered to me, as I was determined to cut ties completely. That's the situation, so please reimburse your share of the living expenses I've been covering, I firmly stated. I had kept meticulous records of our household expenditures, which I planned to use as evidence to fairly divide our assets. It's marital property, he argued. Yes, understood. Let's divide it accordingly, I agreed. He ended the call with a reminder, which seemed more like a prompt not to forget about his supposed entitlements. A few days later, he called again, repeating his earlier questions. It seemed they were not only short on memory but also limited in vocabulary. What do you mean by the division of shared property? Why is it 0? You must be swimming in cash from your parents' insurance and alimony, he accused. Ah, so that was what they assumed. I patiently explained that my pre-marriage savings were not part of the marital property, and since we hadn't accumulated any savings during our marriage, the balance was naturally 0. Don't accuse me of deceit. If you doubt my honesty, you might want to seek legal advice. Henceforth, kindly communicate through my attorney. I won't engage in direct communication with you any longer, I declared, then ended the call and blocked his number. 1 month after my departure, Charlie and his family finally vacated the apartment. Their departure wasn't due to a change of heart, but rather because they could no longer sustain their lavish lifestyle without access to my funds. Predictably, Charlie's income alone wasn't enough to support a family of 5 accustomed to extravagant spending. Tightening their belts wasn't an option they were willing to consider. I had allowed them to use the card intentionally, knowing it would lead to this outcome. As financial pressures mounted, his family began badgering Charlie for shopping funds, and when he refused, they resorted to pilfering from his wallet. Even in their frustration, they blamed him for my departure. To compound their troubles, I had arranged for the utilities, electricity, gas, and water, to be disconnected since I had no intention of residing there any longer. Charlie tried to get the utilities reinstated over the phone, but since the condo was in my name, no one else could restore them if the owner had ordered their termination. During the scorching summer and early autumn, his family struggled to endure the sweltering heat and eventually vacated the condo. Their destination was neither my concern nor interest. Charlie tried to persist until the end, but ultimately capitulated due to the lack of electricity. The inability to maintain basic hygiene compounded their misery. The divorce proceedings, to my relief, progressed more swiftly than anticipated, not because Charlie had a change of heart, but simply because the reality of his untenable situation became undeniable. Charlie's actions betrayed the sanctity of our marriage as he pursued relationships with other women, misleading them with the allure of his so-called luxurious downtown apartment. Astonishingly, he carried out these behaviors under the watchful eyes of his family, who chose to ignore his indiscretions, showing that such behavior wasn't unexpected to them. Before leaving, I had discreetly installed cameras throughout the house, capturing clear evidence of his wrongdoings. Perhaps Charlie underestimated me, but the evidence of his disrespect was undeniable. He had invited his family into my home without my consent, incurred substantial expenses on our joint credit card, and then left me to foot the bill. Moreover, his infidelity was the final straw. I sought significant compensation in alimony for these transgressions. When Charlie was confronted with the financial consequences of his actions, he visibly paled and pleaded for reconciliation. However, I had no intentions of going back. Knowing he couldn't cover the costs, I pressured him to borrow as much as possible from his company and seized whatever assets I could. When I threatened legal action for the fraudulent use of our family car, he reluctantly agreed to my terms. I can only hope he earnestly attempts to settle his debts. The divorce has since been finalized, and I am now staying at my grandparents' home. I'm still undecided about what to do with the apartment. While it holds sentimental value as an inheritance from my late parents, the recent events have tainted my memories of the place. Selling it might be an option I consider. Professionally, my career as an illustrator is thriving. For now, I am content working from my grandparents' home, depending on their support a bit longer as I prepare for the next chapter in my life. As I move forward, I am resolved to be more discerning in choosing a partner, valuing traits beyond mere attractiveness. I hope to find a life partner with whom I can share my journey,